Good evening, everybody. Austin here. I was going for a walk yesterday, and I walked. I go on different. I take different paths every time. So I'll go down a different road, or I'll have a certain destination in mind that I like to go to, but I'll take different ways of getting there just to kind of spice things up. And I decided to walk across my high school soccer field, and I was just doing the math, and it's been one, four, so five, six, five. Wait, what? Four. What can I count? It's been 6 years. It's been 6 years since I was in high school because I graduated in 2014. That's scary to me. Mentally, I'm still kind of. I feel like I'm 18. I feel like there was a really significant shift in my maturity and in my personality. A lot happened around about the age of 18 to me. And that was like the biggest shift since. There hasn't been a really big one since then. Been a lot of changes, but I don't know, it's weird. Like I just feel like I am an 18-year-old that's been undergoing a lot of changes. I wonder what that means psychologically in terms of identity. But yeah, so anyway, going for a walk, and I was thinking about 6 years since high school, since grade 12. So 10 years, 9 or 10, whatever, since I entered grade 9, since I entered high school. That's wild. I'm an old man, folks. I am an old, frail gentleman. But that's okay, because I can bring wisdom to episode 3 of On Behalf of the Fool, which is what this is. It is my podcast where I talk about Catholic theology and philosophy stuff and things, and really just whatever I want to. If you want a more in-depth description of what this show is, I really hope it is episode 3, not episode 4. I think it's episode 3. Please go check out episode 1, where I talk about the title of the show and its inception, its idea, where it came from, why I'm doing it, etc., etc. And also, one of my complaints is when people say, I complained a lot in the last episode, so it won't be a very complaint-filled episode today. But one of my complaints, I'll get it out of the way, is when people say etc. It's actually etc. because it's Latin, right? And really, if you were doing what's the word I'm looking for? Not medieval Latin, but classical Latin. It would be et cetera. You wouldn't say cetera, you'd say cetera. Like Cicero is Cicero. In medieval Latin, they call him Cicero. In classical Latin, like if you were around in like 200 BC speaking Latin, you would say Cicero. So there's always a hard C. There is no soft C in classical Latin. So really it's et cetera, but whatever. We can allow for medieval Latin to come in. I'm fine with this, and we'll call it etc. But notice etc. etc. It's not etc. or etc. I don't know what people say, but they say etc. They do wrong, false, patently false. These are the important things. This is why you come to the show, to learn about these things. I went for a walk today, and one of the things I was thinking about while on my lovely walk, first of all, absurdly windy today. My goodness. I was tightening my hat, my Trent hat, that I got at graduation, or convocation, I should say. So thanks, Trent. I studied for 4 years, and all I got was this lousy hat. It's a great hat, not lousy, so it's totally worth it. And I had to tighten that a lot. Very windy day, but still, lovely little walk. I highly encourage you all during this quarantine to get outside at least once a day, even if it's just for a short 5-minute walk around the block, just to get the blood pumping, You know how it is. So I went for a walk, and at some point, while I was crossing the field that has the power lines in particular, I got thinking, wait a minute, was I thinking about this on my walk, or was this another shower thought that I had? The problem was I had one thought that I wanted to write, and I wanted to put it into my seminarian post that I'm doing every Monday for the Vocations Office of Peterborough. Check that out at his Facebook page, Vocations Office Peterborough Facebook page. And then I had another idea that I wanted to include in the podcast, and I forget which was which. So in the Peterborough post, I talked about value and value theory and stuff like that. Okay, what did I want to talk about on the podcast? It had something to do... Oh, right. So I was going to bed last night. Wow. So I didn't think of this originally on the walk. I didn't think of this originally in the shower. Originally, it was last night. Going to bed, and I was... My nightly ritual, which I don't think is a healthy ritual, but it's my new quarantine ritual. I'm going to work on it, folks. Be patient with me. Is I'll watch like sports highlights videos. That's like my main thing, but I'll also just watch other videos on YouTube, and I eventually pass out doing that. And one of the videos that came up in my recommended or suggested box, whatever, was a video on how to get motivated. I forget what the title was. Something about motivation and tricking your brain, or ways to kind of get yourself into the mode of doing things that are difficult, okay, versus things that are easy. And it was talking about something called the dopamine detox. And I heard about this before. I'm subscribed to a YouTube channel called Improvement Pill, which I think is a neat little name for a self-help YouTube channel. And every intro he goes, "Hey everyone, Improvement Pill here," and I'm like, that's brilliant. And so I remember watching a video maybe like a year or two ago, or more, I don't know, by this Improvement Pill guy, where he talks about the detox, the dopamine detox. And so this video talked about it as well. So it wasn't completely new, but it was nice to get a refresher because I had kind of forgotten about it. And this guy did a little bit of a better job explaining it, I think. Or maybe it's just whatever. He did a good job of explaining it. And I'm going to explain it to you right now. Essentially, what the video was talking about was how we have a chemical in the brain called dopamine. I think that that's a fairly well-known fact now. For anybody who's at all interested in neurology and physiology and things like this, and kind of basic psychology even. But whatever, I think technically it's a hormone, but we'll call it a chemical. So dopamine is a chemical, and it's usually called like the pleasure chemical. So if you eat a piece of cake, your brain releases a bunch of dopamine because that's pleasurable, right? And that's fine to call it the pleasure chemical, but to be a little bit more precise, or for the purposes of the video anyway, the guy was calling it the desire chemical. Okay, so it's the chemical that, yes, it's of course associated with pleasure and feelings of good feelings, but it's even more so, or more importantly for our purposes, associated with desire. So when you're eating the piece of cake, you're releasing dopamine. Okay, so yes, there's pleasure there, of course, but it's also the desire for the thing, because we desire pleasure, right? Those two things are linked together. And he was talking about how a study was conducted by who knows, and I just believe it when people say so-and-so did a study. And they, this magical, ominous they we always talk about, they did a study where they put rats, it's always with rats, by the way, psychologists always test on rats. It's hilarious. I think there's a joke somewhere about that. I forget it right now, but I remember hearing a joke about rats. And they gave the rats they were able to hook up electrodes, and the electrodes were supposedly able to trigger or not trigger, turn off or turn on the dopamine, whatever mechanism in the rat's brain, the dopamine factories, the production, right? And so when the rat pulled a lever, that would turn on the device, and it would give them a little electrical shock in the brain that would stimulate the dopamine factory, and so they get a kick of dopamine from flicking the lever. And they would just do this every now and then, just because, like exploring the cage. Sometimes you go and flick the lever, and boom, you get a shot of dopamine. And after a while, they start to form a connection. They'd realize, oh, wait a minute, it's me flicking the lever that's giving me the shot of dopamine. It's not just a coincidence. And so they'd start flicking the lever, and they would flick it so much that they wouldn't eat, they wouldn't sleep, they wouldn't drink water. They would actually pass out from exhaustion because they were so hooked on the dopamine, okay, that they were getting constantly from this lever. And they had another experiment where they had the electric shock give the rat, a current in such a way that it had no dopamine, or like severely diminished dopamine, right? So that it wasn't producing any, or it was producing very, very little naturally. And those rats lost all motivation. They wouldn't eat, they wouldn't mate, they wouldn't go and drink water. Like, it was like they were dying. Like, they were just so lethargic, they had no motivation. What was interesting is if the researchers brought food right in front of the rat, it would eat the food and enjoy it. As far as I could tell from the rat scans, it would enjoy the food and eat the food and have a good time, and it was good. But it would still eat, but it would not go out of its way to eat or do anything. It wouldn't go out of its way to do anything. It would just live. Had no motivation. So that's why it's a bit more helpful to call dopamine the desire chemical, right? Because it's obviously not just linked to pleasure, because the rats were able to experience pleasure eating the food, but they just they had no motivation to go get it themselves, okay? Now, if you take this and apply it on a human level, I am always skeptical of things like this, because I hear so many things, so many studies that come out where they studied on dogs or rats or pigs or bats, and I think, that's nice. I'm not a rat. I'm a human. right? So can you test it on a human, please? Okay. But anyway, I think there's something to be said for this, that there is a connection between, or you can think of motivation and desire and things like this in a many different ways, spiritually, socially, emotionally, whatever. But one way certainly is physiologically. So let's talk about dopamine, and I think it helps me anyway. And the idea is that, take a heroin addict, for example, or anybody who's addicted to any kind of substance or any kind of addiction, okay? What happens is you're getting dopamine in unnaturally high amounts, and therefore you're desiring that thing again. So if it's heroin, you're getting the heroin. Unnaturally high amounts of dopamine are being released, therefore a lot of pleasure and a lot of desire. And so you're going to desire at a physiological level that heroin again. Even though logically you can see that it's destroying your life, let's say, right? You're spending all of your money on this. It's putting you into, it's killing you. Like you're not eating, you're not sleeping well, whatever. It's ruining relationships, it's ruining your career, all these things. So you can see logically that you should stop. And yet the desire is so profound, so strong because of the dopamine, right? Whereas if you were to quit, and now if we're talking about heroin specifically, if you were just to quit cold turkey, you'd have like withdrawal symptoms. You can get physiologically hooked to a substance like that, right? But not just heroin. That's a extreme example in order to illustrate the point. It works for lots of things. So let's take a more benign example. I think many more of us can relate to, which might be something like social media or video games. I'll take video games because it's something that I relate to really easily. In my experience, I've been a gamer for years, and in the past few years, like going to university, I was wise enough to not bring video games with me. I said, I'm not bringing my video games with me to university. I brought, actually, you know what's true? I brought my PlayStation, but it was just used to play movies, like because it's also a Blu-ray player, right? It has a DVD player in it. So I did not have internet in my apartment in university, and I didn't bring any games with me. I brought the console so I could play movies, but I didn't bring any games with me. So, because I knew from years of high school and a few years of elementary school before that I loved video games. I was a big gamer in high school. I spent a lot of time, playing video games in high school. And so I was like, if I'm going to do this whole university thing right, I cannot give myself the opportunity to play video games because I will get hooked, right? I do not have the self-control. So that was a good decision for me to make. But now being in quarantine, I have my gaming apparati here. I mean, I have my consoles gone, but I can play some games on the computer or whatever with some friends. So it's one of those things that I can't just get rid of the computer. I guess I could. But anyway, I'm getting really off track here, folks. Point is, I'm back into gaming a bit more now than I have been in the last 5 years, really. And it's easy for me to spend 2 hours, let's say, playing a video game. So let's take an example. There's a game called Rocket League that I have where you control a little car that has a rocket on the back, like a rocket booster, and you play soccer with it. So it's like rocket car soccer, essentially. The game is designed to give me, or the player, constant doses of dopamine throughout the gaming experience. So you make a good passing play, you receive a good passing play, you score a goal, you shoot a close shot, or you save a goal, you save a shot. You win a game and you win 10 games and your rank goes up from gold level 3 to division 4 to platinum level 1, division 1, right? Like there are all sorts of ways the game awards you for doing challenging things. And that is constantly releasing dopamine because you're accomplishing something, right? So I'm able to accomplish so many little things in this game over the course of 2 hours. That's why it keeps me hooked for 2 hours straight, because I'm constantly getting a feed of dopamine. And then it makes me want to play it again and play it more, even though I can see that I have other better things to do maybe. And I'm not saying playing video games is inherently wrong. It's just there should be a balance, right? For some people 2 hours is okay. For others it isn't. Whatever. I'm just saying that I can certainly get hooked on it really easily because of the dopamine that's happening, right? It's a constant drip. It's like a morphine drip of dopamine. Whereas something like spending 2 hours and learning a language or an instrument, let's say practicing piano, doesn't give me the same experience or amount of dopamine. So to put it into kind of numbers, if we could, let's suppose that over the course of 2 hours of practicing piano, I experience a total of 50 units of dopamine, 50, right? Let's say that at the beginning I experience a little bit because I'm watching a little tutorial video and I'm learning something new about chords or something, so that kind of feels good to learn something new. And then let's say at some point in the middle, I get a really big kick of dopamine because the thing I've been practicing for an hour and a half that wasn't really working out, finally I'm starting to get it. And let's suppose at the end I get a really big kick of dopamine because I look back and say, I just practiced for 2 hours. That's great. I'm making progress. I'm better than I was yesterday. Whoopee, right? Okay, 50 units of dopamine at the end of the 2 hours. Whereas if you compare that to playing Rocket League, where I get like 5 units of dopamine every 3 to 5 minutes, well, I'm going to finish that gaming session after 2 hours with like a total of 130 units of dopamine. And it's not like I have to wait for it. It comes, it's spread throughout. Whereas in practicing piano, I'm going to have all kinds of time spent just trying to do the same thing over and over and over again, not accomplishing it and not getting any dopamine. Whereas playing Rocket League, I get a constant, morphine drip of it, right? It's just consistent dopamine, and it totals at a much higher number, like over double what I would get from playing piano. So this is an illustration of why we find things that are easier to do. That's why we do things that are necessarily like, it's not just a matter of the fact that playing Rocket League is easier than playing the piano. It's the fact that there's the dopamine being released constantly. So what can I do in order to kick the habit if I feel like I'm gaming too much and not practicing piano enough? I just don't have the motivation to go practice piano. And I do have the motivation to go play Rocket League for 2 hours. Like, what do I do about that? One theory is what was talked about in this video, which is the dopamine detox day, the DDD. I didn't call it that. I'm calling it that. But you essentially do a dopamine detox. And the way they explained it is pick a day, one day of the week, and refrain from doing all those things that you usually do in order to get your dopamine fix. So for me, that would probably look like, and maybe for other people, whatever, it would look like not playing video games, not watching TV or movies, not listening to music, not eating junk food, not, I don't know, maybe not playing board games, depending. I mean, that's one of those things that kind of goes into the realm of, are you socially bonding with your family? Is it one of those things you kind of should do? I don't know. But, no social media, don't go on your phone at all, don't text, things like this, right? Stay off of YouTube, whatever. All those things that you find easy, that have that constant drip of dopamine, that get you that 130 units at the end, just completely take them away. What you can do that day, now the video that I saw a couple years ago, the guy said, I try and do almost nothing that day. He's like, so, I sleep, I eat, I do whatever work I have to do that day, and I meditate, and I go for a walk, and I work out. Like, that's it, right? Keep it very, very basic. You can exercise, you can, of course, eat and sleep and whatever. You can read, you can meditate, you can journal, write things down on a physical piece of paper. You can maybe have a conversation with somebody, but depending on who you are, does that mean that you're just going to be, don't text them? Does that mean you're just going to be like FaceTiming or calling them the whole time? Are you really just trying to find a new drip of dopamine? The whole point is just to try and go for those things, whatever those things are, that give you less dopamine, and avoid those things that give you more dopamine. So go for the 50 unit things after 2 hours, the 50 unit, practicing piano type things, and avoid the 130 unit type things like playing video games. The reason you do this is because the brain, the body, has developed a tolerance to the dopamine, so that 130 units over 2 hours is the new rush. That's something that feels good and exciting. And that's something that really kicks up your desire, that motivates you to go get 100. You're motivated to go get 130 units of dopamine over 2 hours playing that video game. So over 2 hours, going to go get 50 units of dopamine isn't motivating, because you go, well, hang on a minute. Your brain's doing this, your body's kind of doing this calculus, brain, body, whatever, is doing a calculus and saying, I could spend the next 2 hours and get 50 units of dopamine at the end, really spread out and dry. Or I could spend the next 2 hours getting 130 units of dopamine, and it's consistent over that entire 2 hours. I mean, what do you think you're going to choose? Like, we got pretty intelligent brains and pretty intelligent bodies. It's going to go for the 130 units spread out over time, right? That's the better choice in terms of what's more pleasurable, right? But that means then that if you take away the 130 units, let's say you didn't have the video games as an option, all you had was the piano playing, you're going to find that more boring, less exciting. You're going to desire it less than the 130 units of video games. Keep in mind, go back to the rat. The rat still enjoys the food, okay? It's just not motivated to go get it itself. Similarly, you still enjoy the piano playing. You just won't be as motivated to get it, number one. And number two, you will probably enjoy it less than you enjoy in terms of just raw pleasure units, right, than the gaming. But the more important thing here, if I've been misrepresenting the point, is focusing on the desire. You're going to desire playing the piano less. That's where the boringness is coming in than you would playing the video game, right? And this is the point. So what you do is you take a day where you detox, okay? You say, I'm going to take a day and I'm going to make sure that I don't engage in any of those high dopamine activities. And instead, I'm going to engage in the low dopamine activities. And preferably engage in those low dopamine activities that are the more productive ones, or the ones you want to be doing in the first place, right? Like managing your small business or learning that new language or instrument or working out, whatever it may be. So those things that you want to do, they're good for you to do. They're goals that you have, but you just have low motivation for them because of the dopamine competition that they're losing, right? Compared to the video games or those instant gratification things such as social media, movies, Netflix, etc. etc. Take that. So this is the dopamine detox day. So I heard this last night and I thought, okay, I'll do it tomorrow, which is silly because I'm recording this on a Sunday and I don't think it's a good idea to do a dopamine detox day on a Sunday. I think Friday would be the best day of the week to do it, but I watched the video on a Saturday night, so I wasn't going to wait till Friday because then I knew I probably wouldn't do it anyways. I'll just do one today and then another one on Friday, and then I'll just make Friday my dopamine detox day. So that'll, I'll do 2 in 1 week, and the rest will just be one a week. Keep it pretty simple. And I gotta say, it's trickier than I thought. Like there are little things. It's and I think that I think Catholics might have an easier time with this because we're more used to it because there are certain things kind of built into the liturgical year that involve detoxing from dopamine. So for instance, like every Friday you don't eat meat. Like that's an example of a dopamine detox. You desire eating a steak, but you're not going to on the Friday. Or we just we're in Easter right now. We just got out of Lent, and I mean Lent is where you impose on yourself certain other examples of fasting, and so you get used to depriving yourselves of those dopamine kicks as well, and having to do things that are less desirable for yourself, or whatever, like personally less desirable, right? And so I think that it's not like impossible. And I think that just also in terms of growing up, being more mature, like kids have a hard time, right? Obviously, kids have a hard time with giving up things that release dopamine. Whereas you get older, you get more willpower, you get better with practice just because you kind of have to. Like part of growing up and maturing involves doing things you don't necessarily want to do, but you do them because they're good for you. Like I remember I made a rule for myself that I did not always follow, but I made the rule anyway, which was to never go to bed. So this was when I lived in my own apartment. To never go to bed when there are dishes in the sink, and I failed sometimes at that rule, and I always regretted it every single day. Like waking up in the morning and seeing a sink full of dishes was just so draining because you're starting your day off on the wrong foot. It's awful. It is awful. So I highly recommend always make sure that when you go to bed, the dishes are done. The only exception that I could think of is if you're having like a dinner party or something, and the next day you can sleep in. You don't have to go to work or whatever, right? Then you have some time in the morning to clean up. That's like the only exception, because then you have, it's an unusually high amount of dishes, and you're hosting late into the night, and everybody goes home, and you're just exhausted. You just want to go to bed. I get that. Okay, that might be an exception, but like for like a Tuesday night, oh my goodness, do the dishes before you go to bed. And I always felt I got better with it actually, after making that mistake enough times, that by the end of like after living in my own place for like a year and a half, I was always doing the dishes first before I went to bed. Even if I was exhausted, I said I'm gonna sacrifice that last 15 minutes, of the day, and I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna bite into that sleep time that I want, I'm just going to do the dishes. And I was always grateful in the morning for doing it. But that's one of those examples where just kind of, getting older and maturing in life and having to do things you don't necessarily want to do is a way of doing it. So yeah, one method of counteracting this problem, you might call it, this phenomenon that can become problematic of more easily falling into the high dopamine activities to the detriment of those good and worthwhile and useful goals you have that involve low dopamine activities. One method is the dopamine detox day. Also, just kind of to prove to yourself that you can do it. And then that just goes to show that it's something that for the next time you can remember that you can in fact do it. There are all kinds of little tricks too. One of the other ones is one of the problems with trying to, how do I word this? When you're playing a video game like Rocket League, the game is designed to give you all kinds of checkpoints throughout your gaming session that release dopamine. Okay, dopamine gates you can call them. So you're passing through these dopamine gates, such as scoring a goal, making a good pass, saving a shot, whatever. Okay, whereas studying, learning piano, practicing piano for 2 hours might be dry for a long time, or like studying Greek or something. That can be really dry for a long time, and it takes a long time before you get to the dopamine release at the end. I can think of another example might be even like writing a paper. That's not to say you hate it and you don't desire any of it. I think if you hate the whole thing and you don't desire any of it, it's probably a good indication that this isn't something that you should be doing, unless like you kind of have to for like your job. It's something you're willing to put up with. I don't know, but like I never hated doing philosophy when I was in my philosophy undergrad. I actually really quite enjoyed doing my readings. There was less dopamine involved than playing video games, and I can see that in the sense that I would find it difficult to bring myself to study, whereas I did not find it difficult to bring myself to scroll through Instagram for half an hour. But once I started, it was really interesting and I'd be hooked. And this is just me like reading Immanuel Kant and taking notes for homework notes so I can have them for lecture the next Monday. So it's nothing particularly exciting, but I really enjoyed it because I liked philosophy. Again, the rat still likes the food. When you put the food right in front of his face, he's not motivated to go get it. So I wasn't all that motivated sometimes to do my homework, but I always enjoyed, or often, didn't always, but I often enjoyed the homework that I was doing. So there's that. Where was I? Something about being motivated to do homework. Yeah, so one way is the dopamine detox. The other way is, so Rocket League video games are designed to give you these dopamine gateways as you play. So you could rig the game in what you're doing in order to create these dopamine gateways. So for instance, let's take writing an essay. That might not be something that you're all that motivated to do. So one thing that's intelligent, first of all, is intelligent just in terms of writing an essay well. But secondly, is also in terms of giving yourself these dopamine checkpoints, is to break up the essay into different chunks. It's called chunking. That's the study method this is. But from a physiological point of view, you say, okay, level 1 is the research phase. Level 2 is outlining. Level 3 is writing. Level 4, drafting maybe. And then level 3 might be drafting. Level 4 might be writing it, from turning it from a draft into an actual written document, which might be just revising. And then the next level is editing. And the next level is publishing. Okay, you might put it that way. And each level, you give yourself a dopamine kick. So one way might just be you reflect on it and say, I said that I was going to research for the from 10 a.m. until noon, and I did. Boom, that's great. I did that. I researched. I feel more confident for the next day of research or for the next level, next stage of writing, whatever it may be. So that right there might be enough of a dopamine kick. If it's not, you might just introduce an external source. So you might say, if I do these 2 hours of research, I'm going to give myself a cookie at lunch, right? So you're not going to eat the cookie, which you get a nice dopamine kick from, until you're done that stage. All right, you reward yourself. So that so it's a way of kind of not putting up a competition between writing the essay and eating the cookie or playing the video games, whatever, but rather you kind of link them together. You reward yourself by, for every 2 hours of research I do, I get a half an hour of Rocket League or something like that, right? That's one way of doing it. So introducing ways of having these dopamine checkpoints, I think that's a really clever way of pulling it off. In combination with the detox the dopamine detox, which I think is important to do because it does lower your tolerance. Otherwise, you might find yourself the first couple essays you write, you have a cookie after writing the essay, and then the next couple essays you're eating a cake, and the next couple essays you're having like a buffet or something. Like if your tolerance is increasing while you're doing this, you're going to have to keep bumping up your rewards, or else they'll cease to have the same effect. So I think it's good to combine both of these methods, right, to make sure you have the dopamine detox. But let me tell you a little anecdote about this. That I experienced a dopamine detox during my 30-day retreat. So I went on the St. Ignatius 30-day spiritual exercises, and basically what that was for me and the guys, the brother seminarians of mine that went on the retreat with me, we went to a place in Guelph, the Jesuit Retreat Center it's called, and it was every day 5 prayer periods, each, they're an hour long each, so 5 hours a day of prayer, guided prayer with scripture. You meet with your spiritual director once a day for an hour max. For me, it was more like 25 minutes usually were the meetings. And you also have mass every day. We had adoration twice a week, and you have whatever other personal prayers you do. Okay, so I was spending 5 hours in prayer, then an hour in mass is 6, and then if it was a day with adoration, that'd be 7, and then if you have my own personal prayers for the day, that might bring me to 8. So I would be spending. It wouldn't be uncommon to spend 6 to 8 hours a day in prayer, which was a lot. At the same time, you are in silence, so you talk to your spiritual director for however long, but that's it. You don't talk to anybody else. You don't have your phone on you. There are no TVs. There's no movies. There are no board games. There's no music. There's no playing soccer. There's nothing. Like it's all gone. It's all taken away. You have prayer, and you can go for a walk, and you can knit, and you can read some spiritual reading, and that's it. You do that for 30 days. And actually it was 35 days. And we had 2 days of repose, they were called, 2 break days. And we were encouraged to go out and hang out and go to a pub and whatever and talk and have a good dinner together, whatever. And we definitely did that. Like we went out bowling and stuff. So we definitely made the most of our repose days. But that's 2 days, and but most of the time you were spent just doing everything I just told you, right? A lot of prayer and not a lot of high dopamine activities, and a lot of instead low dopamine activities. And I didn't have I'm just realizing this, since I watched the video and like whatever in the last 24 hours, that I could explain this from an intellectual, from a social, from a psychological, from a spiritual point of view, but from the physiological point of view, my tolerance for dopamine went way down. That is to say that before, and let me give you an example of this. I found myself running into an unexpected problem. So typically what my day structure would look like is I would wake up in the morning and have a shower, get dressed, all that, and then do my first prayer period for an hour. I would have breakfast. Immediately following breakfast, I would have a spiritual direction. And then I would have a couple of hours between spiritual direction and my next prayer period that I could fill in the morning, that were just for me. Because it didn't make any sense to do another prayer period because then it's just too much praying. You want to give a little bit of space in between. You don't just want to be praying. Like, it would be silly to just do 5 hours straight of prayer and then have the rest of the day to yourself. Like, that's not a smart way of spreading out the day. So I had a bit of time, a couple hours between my spiritual direction and my next prayer period and then lunch. And I found myself unexpectedly just plopping myself on the bed and daydreaming for 2 hours straight. 2 hours! And I would just think about, I can't even tell you, like I didn't write it down. It was just random stuff. Sometimes I think about, what if I was a billionaire? What would I spend my money on? Or what if I was a movie star? Or what if back in high school I was really into cars and I was a mechanic? What would my life have been like then? Just random scenarios. And I could go for 2 hours. And like it was so easy to do. And I found myself actually really running into a problem where I couldn't stop myself, where I was spending then I'd do my next prayer period and I go to lunch and I come back and I do it again. I spend another 2 hours. Like I could spend 4 or 5 hours a day, spread out of course, just in these daydreams. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not, I've never done this before. I've never had a problem with daydreaming. What's going on, right? And now looking back on it, in explaining it in a kind of a physiological way, I can say that my theory anyway is that my dopamine tolerance had gone so low that daydreaming was extremely like exciting. I desired that a lot more. So before, where like hanging out with the guys and having a conversation or something would release, let's say, 100 units of dopamine, and sitting in my room daydreaming would release 22 units of dopamine, there was no competition. Like I was never tempted to go say to the guys, "Oh, all right, guys, I'm done. I'm done hanging out with you. I'm done talking to you. I got to go to my room and daydream for 2 hours." Like that would never happen because I was getting a much more I desired to keep having the conversation with the guys way more than I desired daydreaming. It's not to say that daydreaming wasn't fun, but it was only 22 units, let's say, right? Whereas I was getting 106 units from hanging out with the guys. But my tolerance went so low during the 30-day retreat because I wasn't getting anything. I wasn't getting a lot of dopamine. That 22 was a feast, right? 22 units of dopamine, and I'm making up the word units. I don't know if it can be measured this way. I'm just using that to illustrate the point. 22 units was like that was delicious, right? 22 units became a new high. Whereas once I went back into the world again, came out of the retreat, I didn't spend any time daydreaming because 22 units was pathetic compared to the 100 units that I would get from hanging out with the guys or playing soccer or something else, right? Doing something more more interactive that released more dopamine. So my tolerance went back up a bit higher. But it was so low during the 30 days that I found daydreaming an extremely desirable thing, that I was hooked on it to the point where I had to force myself to get out of the building. It actually got pretty bad that like by the end of the 30 days, I started doing most of my prayer periods walking. I actually spent like 5 hours a day walking because I just needed to get out of the building, or else I just sit in my bed and daydream. And again, it's all in silence. It's all quiet. Like, oh my gosh. And I found myself doing my prayer periods. We were able to walk. If you walked about 20 minutes down the road from the retreat center, there was like a Walmart plaza. And I would just walk around the parking lot and even walk around inside the store just because I needed to be around people. Like the need to get more like stimulus than I was normally getting during the day got so profound that I would just do my prayer periods, or even just in my free time I would walk around in silence around Walmart just because I needed the what's the word, activity of people parking their car and walking around and talking. I needed that. Which is pretty funny looking back on it now. But yeah, so my dopamine tolerance was so ridiculously low that 22 units from daydreaming was a feast, right? And so this is one of those things that I think is helpful in terms of if you want, I don't know, I'm doing it right now. I'm doing the dopamine detox today. So I'm going to see if it's all that effective. I'm going to compare and see how it goes. But even just the knowledge, the awareness that there is this physiological thing, this physiological dance going on inside my head helps, because now I'm starting to think more consciously about, the thought appears in my mind, hey, right now would be a good opportunity to practice piano. Then I think, no, I don't want to, right? Now I can think to myself, wait a second, this right here is that moment where the dopamine for the piano is only 22 units, but if I go and practice 22 units, right, that's what I said. But if I go and practice piano, yes, it will be a smaller dose of dopamine than playing Rocket League. But number one, I'll get better at piano, which is what I want to do. It's one of my goals. And number two, it'll bring down my tolerance so that the next time I go to practice piano, it'll be even easier. And the next time it'll be even easier. And the next time it'll be even easier. So even just the knowledge of this dance going on inside my head, whether or not the detox has any, real physiological effects, just the fact that this equation, that I can play this calculus helps. It helps at a kind of a psychological level. So I spent a whole time talking about something that really doesn't fit the I don't know what you want to call it. The motto, no, the point of the show. Was any of that Catholic philosophy, theology type stuff and things? No, not really. But also, this show is just stuff that I want to talk about whenever I want to. So that definitely applies to what happened today. So yeah, my advice to you is pick some things in your life that you find to be difficult, but you still want to do them. but you just don't have the motivation for them, and write them down. And then pick a fun bunch of things you find really easy to do, and you can spend hours doing them, and you get a lot of, dopamine, a lot of pleasure out of them. You desire them a lot, but they're not productive, and actually they get in the way of those other productive things that you want to do. Pick a day of the week, and don't do the things on the high dopamine list, and only do the things on the low dopamine list. See what happens. One day a week. Make it a Friday if it makes it easy for you, whatever. And if you don't want to do that extreme, then only take off 75, avoid 75% of the things on the list. Don't do all 100%, just do 75%. Work your way up to 100%, right? Do it that way. Or if you really can't start that way, only knock off one thing. And then the next week, knock off 2. And the next week, knock off 3 on that Friday or whatever your detox day is, and try it that way. I think that you'll find it's easier than you realize, so long as you accept that you're going to be doing things that aren't necessarily all that desirable at first, but it gets easier. Also, a little tip, a little piece of advice. This works for me, and I think it works for a lot of other people too, because I read it online. So surely somebody obviously wrote this. If you're having a tough time motivating yourself to do something, pay attention to what you're physically doing at the time. Oftentimes, I have no motivation to do something if I'm laying down. Shocker. Whereas if I stand up and even just like do a couple jumping jacks or go outside and let the cold hit me for a few seconds, then think about doing that thing that I don't want to do, that's usually enough to motivate me to do it. Just because now I'm in a position of doing rather than a position, physically, like I'm physically in the stance of doing things. I'm standing, I'm doing jumping jacks, I'm looking outside, whatever, rather than being in the physical position of resting, laying down or slouching on a couch or whatever that may be, right? That helps a lot. I am notoriously bad at being up in my head all the time and forgetting that I have a body, but I'm both, right? I'm a mind and a body. So when I remember that and pay attention to my body and recognize, yeah, I'm not motivated to do this thing right now because I'm slouching so much that my neck is at the same level as my waist as I watch this movie. Like, something's wrong here. Whereas if I stand up, I feel motivated, more motivated to do the thing. And at the end of the day, there's also just this sense of having some willpower in doing it, right? There might be a sense of, I don't want to do this. Standing up didn't help all that much. Jumping jacks didn't really help all that much. But I'm just going to suck it up and do it. Call that the, not Robitussin. I always call it the Robitussin method, but it's not Robitussin. Buckley's. Call it the Buckley's method. It tastes awful, and it works.